Welcome back to Real Estate 101, where today we're going to continue our discussion on family law and talk about hidden money in family law cases. And I'm pleased to be joined once again by John Schuman of Devery Smith Frank LLP. John, welcome back to the show.
I'm glad to be here.
All right, John, so I want to start today's show and I want to ask you, is it common in family law cases for hidden money to become an issue?
It is common for hidden money to become an issue, and it's more common that it's a concern than it is a real actual issue. Because when spouses separate, they're often very suspicious of each other, especially when one spouse has been unfaithful, then the other spouse is very suspicious of everything the other spouse has done. And maybe they've hidden money or tried to hide other things so they don't have to share them. And there's two ways that people have to share money when they separate. One is with regard to property issues. And in property issues, when spouses are married, then they share in a lot of their property. And so one spouse may try to hide assets away so that the other spouse doesn't have to share them with the other spouse. The other way is with regard to income. A higher income earning spouse may try to hide income because they don't want to have to pay spousal support, or they don't want to have to pay child support, or they don't have to pay the same amount of child support. But good family law judges and good family law lawyers, they all know about all this, and so they know where to look for that money and to see whether money is actually being hidden or not.
Okay, so can people hide assets from spouses easily?
It's actually harder than most people think. For example, when you want to hide a piece of real property, a house or a cottage or something, then those things are all registered. So there are computerized databases now, so if you want to see whether your spouse owns property someplace else, you can actually search online to see if they own that property or own property someplace else. And in the States, where a lot of people think they've got property in Florida they haven't declared, it's actually public record and easily searchable to find out whether someone has assets or real property assets. Now, things like cars and ATVs and snowmobiles and those sorts of assets, they all have to be registered with the government. And so we can do license plate searches or ownership searches, or people who take out loans we can do property or Personal Property Security Act searches to see whether there are other assets that are missing, and they're easy online searches. So it's not as easy to hide actual assets as you might think it would be.
Okay, so couldn't a spouse easily hide a bank account or money in a Swiss bank account or somewhere in the islands?
That's actually harder than you might think because good family lawyers know where to look. To start, money that's put off into Switzerland or put into the islands, if the person lives in Canada, that money had to come from Canada and be sent there. And so we go and we look for where that money, we go look for transactions that don't have another account they're going to. So $10,000 comes out of your account, doesn't go into another account, we start asking where that went. And it's hard to get money into, impossible to get money into another bank account without having it come from somewhere. The second thing we do is we look at where money is being spent or what is money being spent on. So when we look at, oh look, this guy just got a new car, where did the money come from that? It's not in any of his bank accounts. So where did that money come from? It came from another bank account that we don't know where it is. So then we start looking for the other bank accounts and start asking for the source of those funds.
Start trying to trace them.
That's right. And we can even go down to the minute details and look at how much a person spends in a year. So we can see how much you spent in total over the year, including from all your bank accounts and all other things that we know you've bought. We look at how much money you brought in, and if there's no deficit there, we know there's another bank account or money from somewhere funding it. So that's how we find out bank accounts in Switzerland or in the Cayman Islands or wherever someone wants to hide money.
All right, so what about if the money comes from someone else or somewhere else, like an inheritance? Is it easier to hide?
That money is easier to hide because you might not know that the person who has the money received the money. Although usually people who know that someone has a great aunt who is very wealthy, they know that person has died and they think, where did the money go? However, the person who is most important to hide that sort of money is the person who actually would be receiving support. Because a person who has a lot of money that they're sitting on doesn't have as much need for support because they could use that money to support themselves. Whereas the person who who is paying support, then that person doesn't need to hide the money as much because you don't pay support on your assets, you pay it based on your income. And there's not a lot of return on investment right now on money, so it takes a real huge amount of money before you start seeing enough income to affect things like spousal support. So when you're looking at the lower income earning person, it's usually less of a concern because usually that person has less money to start off with in the first place. So we're a little less concerned, although it is possible to hide that type of money.
All right, so is it easy for a support payer to hide income in order to pay less support?
Well, for most people who earn their money from an employer, it's really hard to hide income because the employer produces T4s or tax documents so that the person who is receiving the money, there's a record, and if that person doesn't report all of the money they received from their employers, then the tax man comes after them. So that's a hard way, or almost impossible to hide money from an employer. Self-employed individuals have an easier time hiding money because they have more things they can manipulate when they're declaring their income. They can try to put money into places where you won't necessarily see it on a tax return. Now, most family court lawyers or judges and most family lawyers know where to look, and so that's harder to do because you're harder to get away with, but it's a way that you can try to hide income.
It's doable.
Yeah.
So people do it.
People do it. In fact, it's not that infrequent for people to try to do it, but it's also frequent that they get caught doing it.
Okay, so what are some of the ways that self-employed individuals avoid declaring income?
Well, there's a few main ways they do it. The biggest one and the most common is that when you're self-employed, you can take off expenses off your income, business-related expenses. And so what a lot of self-employed people do is they try to put in some personal expenses in through as business expenses. Or they put in something like their cell phone, they put in the entire value of the cell phone and all the costs associated with it, instead of putting in just the business part. And when that happens, you get a bit of a benefit from it because you have some income you're not declaring because that you're spending, and you're getting a lifestyle that's tax deductible instead of having to pay tax on it. So that's the main way people do it. And so one of the things that family lawyers do a lot is do a careful, scrupulous look at expenses that self-employed people declare in relation to their business to see whether there are personal expenses there. The second thing that people often do if they're self-employed is that they have a corporation. They can leave money in the corporation. So instead of taking it out of the corporation and declaring, hitting their tax returns, instead of doing that, they leave it in the corporation. It sits in there and accumulates, interest, or they have a bank account that has a growing amount of money on it. So it never hits the tax return. But the child support guidelines in Canada say specifically that money is income that is available for child support purposes. And the courts have said it's also available for spousal support purposes. So if you leave money in the corporation, it doesn't hit your tax returns, but the first thing you're going to be asked for is all your bank or your financial statements for your business, so that the other lawyer can see that increase in capital in the business, and you're going to have to pay tax on that. Then there are some other more minor ways that people try to sneak things through, not to declare money, like cash jobs and that sort of thing. But those are, you can get in more trouble if you get caught doing that, because one of the things the CR does is sort of goes through tax records. So if you get caught doing that, you're in even more trouble. Yeah. And once again, we know where to look when we're looking for that sort of thing. And we look at spending again to see whether a person has too much money for what they say they're making. Okay,
so you mentioned cash income. Is it possible to hide cash income at all in family law cases?
Well, cash income is the hardest to find. And that's one of the places where people get the most suspicious and the hardest to get definitive proof. Although there are some tricks to finding cash income. The easiest way and the most definitive way of doing that is to look at what the costs are that the person's paying, the expenses they're paying. And we do this a lot for things like contractors. So you've got a carpenter who buys $10,000 worth of lumber that they said they did a $12,000 job for. Well, chances are if you spent $10,000 worth of lumber, your job is worth more than $12,000. And so by looking at those supplies costs, we can look back and figure out what the total income should have been for that person based on all those supplies. Like you built an entire house for $10,000 worth of lumber. The other thing that we can do sometimes is we hire private investigators to go in and actually see if they can do a cash transaction. And this catches a surprisingly large number of people who can't resist the cash deals. And so the private investigator goes in, poses as a customer, says they want to pay in cash, and the spouse who's not paying support on that income says, sure, I'll take that cash and I'll give you a bit of a discount, you don't have to pay HST or whatever. And then the PI does a report, and that person loses all their credibility, and they may get nailed by the tax man. So it's a really dangerous thing to do. But people who are really skilled at hiding their cash income and are aware of those sorts of things that their spouse's family lawyer may be doing can try to come up with ways to hide cash.
Okay, and is it easy to track down this hidden money?
Well, it's not necessarily easy, but good family law lawyers and good forensic accountants, they know how to do it. And I've done a lot of these cases where people try to hide money, and you'd be surprised at how often a spouse thinks that they've come up with an ingenious way to hide cash or some income, and I've seen it before. In fact, sometimes I've seen it 10, 15 times before. And so I know where to look in all the places to find that sort of cash. So the spouse they lose their case because I find the money, the judge gets really angry, they lose all credibility. And then the judge says, if you hidden that money—
What else have you hidden?
What else have you hidden? That got caught, I bet you got twice that's hidden still. And then you end up paying like 3 times the support you otherwise would pay, and your property payment gets to be huge. So it's not always wise to hide that money in family law cases. In fact, it's almost never wise to hide money in family law cases.
Okay, John, so can a spouse get a judge to award or to order more support or a higher property payment because they have suspicion of hidden money?
No, judges have to rely on proof, and court is all based on proof. So it's what you can prove, not what you think, that's important in court. So if you can't prove that your spouse has that hidden money, you're not going to get the bigger spousal support payment or the bigger property payment. You have to prove it to the judge. And that's where having a really good family law lawyer is very important, because a good family lawyer will know where to look for that money and will be able to find the proof that that money is hidden, or at least create enough suspicion that the judge knows that the money is there somewhere, and that will let the judge increase the spousal support payment, or increase the property payment, or increase the child support.
All right, John, any last tips for viewers that may be going through a family law issue and might encounter this sort of problem?
The most important thing is to hire a good family law lawyer who knows where to look for the money, and knows how to find the money, or knows how to show that a person isn't hiding money if you're on the other side of the bench. So that's the most important thing you need to do, because these cases are very technical, very difficult, and suspicions don't cut it.
All right, John, great topic. Thanks for coming on today's show, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again next month.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
So there you have it. If you're having a family law issue and need the help of a top family lawyer, get in contact with John Schuman of Devery Smith Frank, LLP. I'm your host, Joe Terceira. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.